Hey class, this is Logan Mitchell. I'm going to share with you guys today some information about JSON Data Serialization and Deserialization, which basically refers to the idea of taking a JavaScript object or an array or whatever. There's various types of objects that can exist, even integers and booleans can be objects if declared properly, but basically taking that data, putting it into just a text string and storing it to another location, or calling a text string from another location. This would be deserialization, and using that string to create a JavaScript object or variables and with values. So so let's get over to the code. Kind of the best way to teach is to show and do, I guess. So let me share my screen. And okay, so I went out and got an example off of W3 Schools, and I catered it a little bit to my own site. But basically, the idea is I started with deserialization. I think it helps to kind of understand the concept a little bit before moving into how to both serialize and deserialize. So in the example, they had a file out there called mytutorials.txt. I created my own version of that file, and all they did was use that information to bring in and make a list of links. So I thought, well, my sources are a list of links at the bottom of my page. Let's use this example to create the unordered list at the bottom of my page that is my sources. So I'm going to kind of go out of order. I'm going to scroll down to what my version of the text file looks like. And while this has line breaks in it, the version that I actually have on my GitHub does not. It's all the text is in one single line. It doesn't have to be, but I wanted to make sure that it could be, and so I tested it by putting it all on one line. But in this case, there's line breaks. But this is what JSON looks like. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So it's going to look very similar to how you would declare an object. If we look right here, this is object notation right here. This is, if you had like var link equals, and you opened it with curly braces and had display colon JSON tutorial. The only difference is in JSON, for some reason, the property on the left side of the colon has to be in quotes as well. And I can't, I'm scared. You're good. And now I'm blanking as to whether or not that's true in actual JavaScript. But yeah, I can't remember. I have to look. Yeah, I think it is actually. But anyways, so this is, as you can see, is one object, and here's another. And if you look at the very beginning, what we have is that it's an opening array and then closes at the end. So we have an array of objects here, and all these objects have two properties with two values. One's a display property, has what's going to be actually in between the A tags, and the other one is the URL, which is going to be the value for the href. And so I've got my series of links here, and then so we know that that's what we're referring to when we're looking for mytutorials.txt. Now, like I said, that's on my GitHub, so it operates as my own little server, at least for my project in NetBeans. So I can do an AJAX call, for those of you who've learned about AJAX, to actually go out and get that file and read it in. So here I've got a basic setup for an AJAX call. But the difference is, when I get my response text here, what I do is I actually pass it in as an array. Remember, well, I'm just calling the variable my array here, but what that's to tell me that this is going to be an array, because this command, JSON.parse, will take in any string and at least try to parse it into a JavaScript object of some sort. So in this case, it should parse it into an array of objects. And then I call against that array, I call my function, which this is again straight out of W3 schools. So my function is defined as being passed a value, and again, it's reminding us that it's an array. And then I added a little extra here because I wanted to put it in an unordered list. So I've got my UL starting and closing tags here, and within that I've got my list item tags and my A tags with the href. And so you'll notice that I'm looping through the array, and each time I do, I'm going after the item in the array that matches the index value of the loop, and then .url, just like you would call any other object. I could also do brackets URL, but .url works just fine as well. It's a property of this object, because remember, the array is an array of objects. So array I is going to be an object, and .url is going to be one of its properties. And then array I .display, and that should give us a string. What this is going to do is going to concatenate all this together, make a big long HTML string called out, that I then find my sources element and set out to the inner HTML of the sources element. Now, if I scroll down here to my sources, you'll see I have a series of links here that match what you saw in that text file. And if I, just to prove it, we inspect element, and this indeed is the element with the ID of sources. So probably getting into the weeds here, so let me pull back out a little bit and go. That's basically it for deserialization. It's taking a big long string, parsing it into an array of objects in this case, and then you're able to work with that information. So moving on to serialization, serialization is taking one of those objects, or in that case, like taking that array of objects and just turning it into a big long string. So in this case, I'm going to use the local data storage that we've learned about to store my serialized data and then recall it. So in this code here, I create a variable called a session. It is an object that has, oh, and it does have the quotes around it. Okay, I was mistaken. So it's got a property called screens, a property called state, and the screens is an array, and then I push a bunch of different screens, again objects, with a name in the screen name, and then a width and a height properties for each screen. And so that's my session variable. So then I create a variable called string session, and what I do is I use a JSON method called stringify, which is basically the opposite of parse. It takes an object that I'm passing it here, session, and stringifies it, turns it into one big long string. And then I store that session. I store string session in the local storage as session. Then I call a variable called restored session, and I go out and I parse. I get the item session from local storage, and I parse it and store it into the variable restored session. So then I have two functions, one for show stringify, which is just going to show the string session value, and another one called show object. And that one's going to have to iterate through the object because I want to be able to call each value by name. I don't want to just get output. If you try to print or set as inner HTML or do anything like that, or log an object, what you get is brackets capital O object, brackets lowercase o object. I could have done something to demonstrate that for you, but basically I don't want that. I want to see the values of the object. But I want to show that the difference in getting there is I have to actually go through the object properties, whereas here I can just display a string. So it can be good for troubleshooting to have just the string. So here's the end result. If I click show serialized string, you can see all of the values that were declared up here. State true, all the screen names. And if I show as formatted object values, here's where I'm going out and getting each one of the object values and printing it out in a way that looks pretty. So the string and the object values. And that's about it. The only other thing I found useful is if I hit F12 here again and I come over to, I believe it's resources, and you can actually look in local storage here, and I can see this has to do with my local storage one here, but I see session, and I can see that stringified value there. Should be able to see all the way to the end of it. Yeah. And so you can check to make sure that the values that you're setting are actually going to your local storage or your session storage if that's the case. I've got nothing in session storage. So that's it from me on Java or JSON data serialization and deserialization. I hope it's been enlightening. You can get access to all of my code at this mitchellfamily.com/portfolio. That should take you to this page as well. Updates are not as frequent as they are to my GitHub, so if you want to go after my GitHub, it's Mitchell-Logan. But I try to push it up as soon as I get working edits done. So thank you for listening. See you soon. Bye.